The Mandelstam saga was one of those things that proved anew, although in a very different way than previous evidence, the barbaric, the brutal, the hypocritic, the animalistic nature of the Stalin regime, even as it made grand claims for itself about the machinations of human history, and the regime was unable to respond to the finer aspects of life. To be fair, it was not its job to respond to literature, it was not its job to respond to spirituality. All it had to do was leave people alone, leave artists alone, leave the monks alone. But it would not do that, guided as it was by a grand sense of violence, a grand sense of repression. Was one of those poets with a deeply original voice. If you read his poetry, it's akin to reading transparent wisps that very slowly take shapes, that very slowly form into sense. He delights in imagery, but he also plays with meaning. And this very mature combination, even in translation, I have not read him in Russian, even in translation you can see the genius shine through. And of course you envy people who can read such poets in meter, in the rhythm of their mother tongue. Now, the part I'm going to read here is from Stephen Kotkin's Stalin, the second volume. In the third chapter, there is a section entitled Poet to Poet. This is sort of a double pun because there is Pasternak, who is a poet, there is Osip Mandelstam, who is a poet, and they are interacting. But the pun is on the fact that even Stalin was a published poet even before he, became a dictator, or even before the Bolshevik Revolution. He wrote quite a lot of poetry. So Mandelstam on the one side, the genius of history, will be speaking on the phone with his accuser, with his critic, who also was critiqued by Mandelstam on the other side, Stalin. The poet Osip Mandelstam, outraged over the famine, had composed 16 lines that blamed Stalin. The verses, which he read to a handful of intimates, did not mention the dictator by name, but mocked a Kremlin Highlander with oily fingers, a criminal underworld past, and part Ossetian descent. In April 1934, Mandelstam saw fellow poet Boris Pasternak on the street, and the two had known each other since 1922, and he recited the rhymed invective to him. Hearsay has Pasternak deeming the lines an act of suicide, responding, "I didn't hear this, you didn't recite it to me." On the night of May 1617, Mandelstam was arrested at his apartment, where the police confiscated manuscripts, letters, and his address book. And the poet was allowed to take a few personal items. He was said to have selected Dante's Inferno. Now you can see panic spread all over the circle, because Mandelstam, the genius recognized at his own time, has been taken. Now the orchestra will play out, because the regime has this clientelistic nature to it. That is to say, in the bureaucratic nature that Stalin has created, there are a lot of people who have been there because they are able to, because they were part of the revolution originally, but because they are able to conduct this orchestra of giving favors, receiving favors, and all this. But there is a very salient point to all this, that even before the terror, nothing penetrated the Stalin office with any sense of practicality in that sense. So Stalin was practical in the way he dealt with the foreign affairs. He was obviously burning his own country down. But if you wanted Stalin to do something, even if you were a Molotov, then Stalin would not rely on the fact that he knew you to make that decision. So in that sense, of course, in that twisted sense, of course, Stalin had some integrity, that he was true to his ideology, and he was true to what he thought that ideology would entail. So now the orchestra plays out. According to the woman who later would become Pasternak's lover, he raced frantically. This is after Pasternak found out that Mandelstam was arrested. He raced frantically all over town, telling everybody that he was not to blame and denying responsibility for Mandelstam's disappearance. In fact, Pasternak did not know, but Mandelstam, under interrogation, had not named all the people to whom he had recited the poem, only those already known to the interrogator, and omitted Pasternak. Now, was this self-defense? Was this on the part of Pasternak and a desire not to be remembered as a betrayer? It could be. At the other extreme, at the other extreme of Pasternak's sort of integrity, the short story writer Pyotr Pavlenko boasted to acquaintances that he'd been allowed to listen secretly to Mandelstam's interrogation at Lubyanka, evidently from behind a door in an adjacent room. Now, you would expect Mandelstam to be sentenced to death, or at least to exile, to some kind of brutal gulag, but he was not. And why? In a surprise, Mandelstam was sentenced not to death or even a gulag camp, but exile in Sherdin, northern Urals, and allowed to take his wife. In early June 1934, he attempted suicide, jumping out a window. Bukharin wrote to Stalin about the poet's frail psychology, noting that Boris Pasternak is utterly at a loss over Mandelstam arrest, and no one knows anything. So now the orchestra is playing out, because Bukharin is one of the most important people in the regime. Then, on June 13, Pasternak was summoned to the phone at his communal apartment on Volkhonka Street. The caller said Stalin would be getting on the line, but Pasternak, like Bulgakov some years earlier, thought it a prank and hung up. Now, poet to poet. This is the name of the section. The phone rang again. The same voice stating the call was from Stalin's office, and to eliminate disbelief, dictated a special number to call. Pasternak dialed it and soon heard Stalin speaking. Stalin told Pasternak that Mandelstam's case had been re-examined and the result would be favorable. The sentence was commuted to mere banishment from the largest cities. He and his wife moved to Voronezh. Stalin asked if Mandelstam was Pasternak's friend, a tricky question. If Pasternak had said yes, he could be implicated. If he said no, he was betraying Mandelstam. Poets rarely make friends, he answered. They envy each other. Stalin told him that if something terrible had befallen one of his friends, he would go to the wall to aid him. This is Stalin's humor, this is his magnanimity. Then Stalin asked if Mandelstam was genuinely a master. I want to go into Stalin's head when he asked this question. I do not think that he was merely trying to trap Pasternak. I think because he was a poet himself, a kind of poet himself, he wanted to hear about a master from some other poet. I think this literary curiosity got the better of him at some point, and he just asked, is he a master? If I kill him, will I be killing a master? Is it like killing Tolstoy? Again, tricky. This could have referred to the verses about the Kremlin Highlander. What Pasternak answered remains a matter of dispute. He seems to have suggested that they meet face to face. Stalin hung up. Pasternak dialed the number again, asking Postkribayshev to reconnect him. But Stalin's aide said the dictator was busy. Pasternak asked whether he could tell others of the call. Postkribayshev said he would leave it to him. That very day, Pasternak told Ilya Ehrenberg, who was living in Paris with a Soviet passport but had just arrived in Moscow with Andrei Malraux. Ehrenberg spread the sensational news to select other writers. For Pasternak, the call had happened extremely quickly. but it would reverberate in his head for a lifetime. So you can see Pasternak sort of straddle between these two giants and having no way of knowing how history would judge him. I think it has done well. I think he has done well. He has done favorably. I will leave the poem in question, the link to that poem in the description below. It's not one of his finest poems, of course, but it's, I think, important to read it to understand what's going on here. I would, however, like to read another poem of his from Tristria, from the collection from Tristria, as an ode to the poet. When the city moon looks out on the streets and slowly lights the impenetrable town, and darkness swells, full of melancholy and bronze, and songs of wax are smashed by the harshness of time, and the cuckoo is weeping in its stone tower, and the ashen woman descends to reap the dead world, quietly scattering huge spokes of shadow, and strews yellowing straw across the floorboards. This is the kind of beautiful thing he writes.